He walked into court a free man. But minutes later, Tom Homan was in handcuffs. What did Judge Boasberg uncover that shocked the nation? Hidden files, leaked memos, and a courtroom twist no one saw coming. This is the moment power met justice, and the fallout is just beginning. The courtroom went silent, then came the gasp. That was the moment everything changed inside the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., a place where legal proceedings typically move at a slow, deliberate pace, suddenly became the stage for an unfolding drama no one could have scripted. The man at the center of the storm? Tom Homan, the former acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, a polarizing figure in American politics. Known for his no-nonsense demeanor, fierce stance on immigration, and regular appearances on conservative news networks, Homan had long portrayed himself as a defender of law and order. But on this day, he wasn't the one enforcing the law. He was answering to it. When the court clerk called his name, the room stiffened. Homan, dressed in a dark gray suit with a striped tie and his signature stern expression, walked toward the defendant's table with measured steps. His body language screamed confidence, but his eyes scanned the room quickly, as if trying to figure out just how serious this situation was. The man who had ordered raids across cities, signed off on controversial detention protocols, and publicly challenged lawmakers over border security was now standing in a courtroom not as a witness, but as a potential criminal defendant. And the man waiting for him at the bench? U.S. District Judge Judge Boasberg, a respected yet firm voice in the judiciary. Known for his handling of high-stakes cases, Boasberg had a reputation for being calm, impartial, and absolutely unshakable. What made this hearing extraordinary wasn't just Homan's presence. It was how sudden and secretive everything had been. There had been no public announcement, no media heads-up. Even legal analysts were caught off guard. According to sources, the courtroom had been quietly scheduled for a sealed hearing, typically reserved for sensitive national security matters or high-profile criminal inquiries. Courtroom staff had been instructed to keep details confidential. Security around the building had quietly increased, and several unmarked black SUVs had been seen circling the courthouse an hour before the session began. But still, no one expected what was coming. As Homan stood before the judge, legal documents were handed out. Thick files, their contents unknown to even the seasoned lawyers present. The prosecution team, led by special counsel Dana Wexler, hadn't been seen in public for months. Their silence had fueled rumors, but no one could confirm what they had been working on. Now, it was all becoming clear. Whispers turned into murmurs as spectators, including a few stunned members of the press, glanced nervously at one another. It wasn't just another immigration hearing. It was something far bigger, far more serious. Judge Boasberg leaned forward slightly and began speaking in a tone that was calm, but carried undeniable weight. Mr. Homan, this hearing pertains to a series of actions taken during your tenure as acting director of ICE. You are not on trial, not yet. But this proceeding will determine whether sufficient grounds exist to proceed with criminal charges. The words hit the room like a lightning strike. Homan shifted. The look of composure on his face faltered, just for a second, enough for those watching closely to see that something had cracked beneath the surface. And then came the gasp, collective, involuntary, from the back of the courtroom, as Judge Boasberg listed the allegations. Obstruction of justice, destruction of federal records, willful defiance of judicial orders. As Boasberg read from the documents, detailing incidents involving detained migrants, delayed court compliance, and internal ICE communications that may have circumvented federal oversight, it became clear. This was a reckoning, not a routine proceeding. The prosecution wasn't alleging mere oversight or clerical mistakes. They were suggesting a coordinated effort to bend or break the law in pursuit of policy. Outside the courthouse, word began to spread. Though phones were supposed to be off, one clerk had managed to whisper a few words to someone in the hallway. Minutes later, Twitter exploded. Tom Homan in court under sealed hearing. ICE records destruction at center of federal case. Whistleblower evidence involved, sources say. And while the rest of the country was just waking up to the breaking news, inside that courtroom, the moment everyone will remember had already begun. As Homan attempted to respond, Judge Boasberg raised a hand. "Mr. Homan, you will have your chance to speak. For now, I must inform you, based on the preliminary evidence presented in sealed documents and the risk of potential evidence tampering, this court has no choice but to place you under temporary federal custody." The gasp turned to silence. Then, movement. 2 U.S. Marshals stepped forward. Homan turned to his lawyer, whispered something, and then stood still, as the cold click of handcuffs echoed through the chamber. It was a stunning fall from power, one that would ignite political debates, media wars, and legal firestorms for months to come. And it had all started in a courtroom where no one expected it, except maybe Judge Boasberg. The clash of power and principle. Judge James Boasberg, a man who had presided over some of the most high-profile federal cases in recent years, sat high on the bench, a calm but commanding presence. Known for his surgical precision with the law and his no-nonsense approach to courtroom theatrics, Boasberg wasn't the kind of judge who raised his voice. He didn't need to. His words carried weight all on their own. That day, however, even his calm tone struck like thunder. In the packed courtroom, all eyes were on the 2 central figures, Judge Boasberg, the unshakable jurist, and Tom Homan, the former acting ICE director who had built a reputation as one of the toughest enforcers of immigration policy in U.S. history. This wasn't just a legal hearing. This was a collision of government power, personal principle, and national politics. The judge began without pleasantries. "Mr. Homan, we are not here today to debate policy. We are here to examine actions, yours specifically." It was a surgical opening line, no distractions, no room for posturing. Homan, his jaw clenched and his hands resting firmly on the table, didn't flinch. He was known for being unapologetic, even defiant, the kind of man who once told Congress, "If you don't like what ICE does, change the law." Now, he faced a man who had the authority to decide whether he had broken it. Homan replied with steely confidence, "I've done nothing but uphold the law." The air in the courtroom stiffened. That's when Judge Boasberg leaned forward slightly and, in a firm, echoing voice, dropped the bombshell. "Then explain to this court why you are being charged with obstruction of justice, contempt of court, and willful defiance of federal subpoenas." The list of charges sent an immediate ripple across the room. Obstruction of justice, a charge often reserved for those who actively interfere with legal investigations. Contempt of court, for allegedly ignoring direct judicial orders. Willful defiance of federal subpoenas, meaning Homan, or people under his watch, may have deliberately refused to turn over documents critical to government investigations. This wasn't just paperwork negligence. These were crimes with intent. The courtroom, though silent, was pulsing with tension. Boasberg continued, "This court has reviewed communications, directives, and internal memos that indicate a pattern of non-compliance with legally binding orders related to the release and processing of detained individuals." The documents referred to by the judge were believed to include emails, encrypted messages, and first-hand accounts from whistleblowers, ICE insiders who had come forward in secret, alleging that key orders from federal courts had been delayed, ignored, or outright dismissed. Homan's defense attorney objected, calling the proceedings politically motivated and deeply flawed. But Boasberg didn't flinch. "This is not about politics. This is about the law," he said. "And no one, not a director, not a policymaker, not a public figure, is above it." It was clear that Boasberg was walking a line few federal judges ever have to. The courtroom wasn't just full of lawyers, clerks, and press. Behind the scenes, this case had implications stretching all the way to the Capitol and beyond. The political temperature outside was already rising. Conservative lawmakers immediately took to social media, calling the charges outrageous and part of a Biden-era witch hunt. On the other hand, civil rights advocates praised the moment as historic accountability. Cable news hosts began dissecting every word of the exchange between Boasberg and Homan. Fox News painted Homan as a patriot under fire. MSNBC called it a long-awaited turning point in immigration justice. Twitter X turned into a battlefield of opinions, hashtags, and memes. Inside the courtroom, Homan wasn't backing down. "Your Honor," he said, with a voice that trembled not from fear, but fury. "I've risked my life to protect this country, and now I'm being treated like a criminal because I wouldn't bow to political correctness?" Boasberg held his gaze for a moment, then replied with chilling precision. "No, Mr. Homan, you are being treated like any American who is expected to follow the law, especially one entrusted with enforcing it." Some in the gallery sat stunned, others visibly emotional. This was no longer just about one man's decisions during his time at ICE. It was about what kind of country the United States wanted to be. One where federal power operates with impunity, or one where even the most powerful are held accountable. For years, immigration policy had been at the center of bitter political warfare, but rarely did it come to a moment as clear-cut and as combustible as this. As the hearing continued, Judge Boasberg ordered the unsealing of select parts of the investigation, hinting that more names could be involved. A flurry of side whispers erupted among the attorneys and journalists. It was a clear signal. This was just the beginning. In one corner of the courtroom stood a man who had built his legacy on border walls and detention centers. In the other, a judge who believed the law had been trampled in the process. The clash of power and principle had begun, and the country was watching every second of it unfold. The secret files that changed everything. What made Judge Boasberg lean forward, pause, and deliver those damning charges? The answer lay in a set of secret digital files, buried deep in encrypted layers of data, files that were never supposed to be found. The courtroom drama that unfolded wasn't spontaneous. It had been building in the shadows for months, maybe even years, through the whispers of whistleblowers and the persistence of investigative teams quietly piecing together a disturbing puzzle. It began with an anonymous tip, received by a federal oversight committee just under a year ago. The message was brief and cryptic. "There are records. They're overseas. Protected. What ICE did under Homan, it's all there. You just have to dig." Investigators initially dismissed it as a hoax. There had been no hard evidence, just rumors and vague accusations. But when a second, more detailed leak arrived, complete with metadata, server coordinates, and encrypted login credentials, the seriousness of the tip couldn't be ignored. Cyber forensics teams, under total secrecy, were assigned to access the files. The digital trail led them to an offshore server in Iceland, protected by layers of privacy laws and anonymous hosting structures commonly used by whistleblowers and investigative journalists. What they found inside was explosive. Over 40 gigabytes of documents, thousands of internal ICE memos, private emails between high-ranking officials, surveillance footage from detention centers, and secure chat logs that investigators believe painted a disturbing picture of systemic abuse, deception, and judicial defiance. The files told a different story than what Homan had presented to the public over the years. The first batch of memos included conversations between field agents and senior administrators discussing how to delay court-ordered releases of detainees, sometimes for days, sometimes indefinitely, under vague national security pretenses. One memo, chilling in its bluntness, read, "Delay compliance until further notice. We'll handle the fallout." Another email chain showed officials discussing ways to evade Freedom of Information Act, FOIA requests, instructing staff to mark sensitive files as temporary drafts to avoid official archiving. But perhaps most disturbing were the video recordings. One clip, time-stamped during Homan's tenure, reportedly showed a detained immigrant, a father separated from his children, begging to speak to his lawyer after a court order for his release had been issued. In the footage, an ICE supervisor tells a junior officer, "He's not going anywhere. That order's not enforceable here until I say so." It was this kind of footage, alongside digital evidence that prompted Judge Boasberg to issue an immediate court summons for Homan just days after the files were decrypted. According to insiders familiar with the case, Boasberg spent an entire weekend reviewing the files personally and was visibly disturbed by what he saw. His legal clerk later told investigators, "It wasn't just procedural defiance. It was a culture, an entire system built around delaying, denying, and deceiving." The whistleblower, whose identity remains protected under federal law, claimed they were an ICE employee assigned to digital compliance, meaning their job was to ensure court orders were documented and followed. But over time, they reportedly grew frustrated and eventually fearful of what they described as institutional disregard for the Constitution. So they copied the files, archived them, and waited for the right moment. It came in the form of a new federal oversight initiative aimed at reevaluating immigration detention practices. That's when the whistleblower sent their message. Now's the time. People need to see this. The files not only documented illegal detentions, but also suggested that high-ranking officials in D.C. had approved of many of the strategies used to delay judicial orders, including members of Homeland Security and external legal advisors. If proven, this wasn't just about ICE. It could blow the lid off of an entire chain of command, reaching the upper levels of federal government. In legal terms, the files revealed potential violations of the 5th and 14th Amendments, which guarantee due process and equal protection under the law. Legal scholars quickly began weighing in on TV and social media, with one former DOJ official stating, "This isn't just an ICE scandal. This could be one of the most significant constitutional violations in modern federal history." Public reaction was immediate. Activists and immigration attorneys, many of whom had long fought for access to such records, took to the streets. Protests formed outside ICE headquarters in several major cities. #ICE leaks, #Homan files, and Boasberg bombshell began trending on social platforms within hours. For families whose loved ones had been detained without cause, this was both vindication and devastation. One woman outside the D.C. courthouse held a sign that read, "You stole years from my husband. Now the truth is out." Meanwhile, conservative voices slammed the leak as politically timed, with some questioning the authenticity of the files and calling the investigation a deep state ambush. But in Judge Boasberg's courtroom, politics weren't on trial. Facts were. Evidence was. And now, Tom Homan was. What started as a few cryptic lines of code on a foreign server had now set in motion one of the most significant legal and political reckonings in recent memory. And the next question was, who else knew? The arrest that stopped the nation. After laying out the damning evidence, Judge Boasberg didn't hesitate. His decision was swift, his tone final. Based on the evidence presented, he declared, "I am ordering the immediate arrest of Mr. Tom Homan for contempt and obstruction of justice." There was a moment, a split second of stillness, where time seemed to freeze inside the courtroom. Then it hit. Gasps, audible, sharp, human. Even some attorneys, hardened by years in federal court, blinked in disbelief. A few reporters tried to suppress stunned expressions as pens stopped mid-sentence. And then came the unmistakable clanking of steel, the sound of handcuffs being drawn and fastened. Homan didn't resist. But the stoic armor he wore all these years began to crack. He turned to face Judge Boasberg, locking eyes with the man who had just stripped him of his freedom. "I've served this country for 34 years, Homan said, voice tight with frustration. "And this is the thanks I get?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement. One part wounded pride, one part challenge, and one part raw disbelief. But Boasberg, ever composed, didn't flinch. "This is not about service, Mr. Homan. This is about accountability." The words echoed like a gavel strike. The U.S. Marshals stepped forward, securing Homan's wrists behind his back. The image was surreal. A man once regarded as a symbol of law enforcement, the face of American immigration control, was now on the receiving end of the very justice system he once upheld. The symbolism was undeniable, and the media? They were already moving at light speed. Chaos outside the courthouse. As Homan was led through a side exit in federal custody, the courthouse steps had already transformed into a battleground of clashing opinions, flying banners and blinking camera flashes. On one side, a large group of immigration rights activists chanted and cheered, many holding signs that read, "No one is above the law," "Justice for the detained," "Accountability now." On the other side, Homan's supporters, many wrapped in American flags or wearing hats bearing conservative slogans, shouted in fury, "This is a witch hunt. Stand with Homan. Protect our borders." It didn't take long before social media turned into a firestorm. Hashtags like #HomanArrested, #Boasberg versus Homan, and #ICE Accountability dominated trending charts on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Within 30 minutes, clips of the courtroom sketch were circulating online, accompanied by dramatic music, commentary, and side-by-side comparisons of Homan during his ICE tenure, and now in custody. Cable news anchors cut their scheduled programming. Breaking banners flooded screens. Breaking: former ICE Director Tom Homan arrested in federal court. Reporters scrambled for quotes. Analysts began speculating on how deep the scandal could go. Was Homan Emotional fallout and reactions. The emotional temperature soared. Immigrant families who had long claimed mistreatment by ICE watched the news with mixed feelings. Some cried, others smiled, some just stared in stunned silence. In one viral video, a young woman whose father was detained during Homan's leadership said, "For years we were told we were lying. Today we were heard." Meanwhile, conservative voices doubled down. Former President Trump issued a Truth Social post within an hour. "Tom Homan is an American hero. This is disgusting. Deep State is alive and well." Fox News dedicated a full hour of primetime coverage to the arrest, calling it the political persecution of a patriot. At the same time, MSNBC framed it as the long-awaited day of reckoning for a man who played judge and jury with human lives. The divide wasn't just ideological. It was generational, cultural, emotional. Homan's arrest didn't just stop the nation, it split it. Legal and political earthquake. Legal experts called it unprecedented, not because high-ranking officials hadn't faced consequences before, but because this arrest had been live, immediate, and based on whistleblower evidence never meant to see the light of day. Former DOJ prosecutor Melissa Grantham said on CNN, "This is a rare moment where the justice system holds someone accountable in real time. No immunity, no delay, just evidence, judge, cuffs." Meanwhile, inside Washington, the ripple effect was growing. Rumors began to swirl about upcoming subpoenas. Would more ICE officials face arrest? Were DHS administrators being investigated? Was this just the first domino? Boasberg, in a press statement issued by the court after the hearing, reminded the public, "Today's events are not about politics. They are about the rule of law. The courts are not instruments of power. They are guardians of the Constitution." But with emotions running high, many wondered if the line between justice and politics had already blurred beyond recognition. A nation watching in real time. As Tom Homan was processed, fingerprinted, and held pending arraignment, the world watched in real time, not through state broadcasts or official briefings, but through phone cameras, live streams, social posts, and reaction videos. In less than an hour, this arrest had become more than a legal event. It had become a mirror reflecting the state of the nation, its anger, its hope, its wounds, and its desire, above all else, for someone, anyone, to finally be held accountable. Whether Homan will be convicted remains unknown, but on that day one thing was clear. The badge no longer protected him, the courtroom did not fear him, and the justice system, for better or worse, had finally caught. Fallout, fury, and the fight ahead. The courtroom had emptied, but the aftershocks had only just begun. The political earthquake set off by Tom Homan's arrest reverberated across the country. News outlets scrambled to keep up with the evolving story, and the American public found itself once again divided, not just over policy, but over principle. The nation reacts. Red versus blue. Within hours of the arrest, the political machine roared to life. Conservatives were quick to condemn the move as a targeted attack, claiming Homan was being persecuted for doing the job that politicians were too afraid to do. One GOP senator went live on Fox News, visibly angry. This is about criminalizing border security. They want to make an example of Tom Homan because he wasn't afraid to enforce the law. Former President Donald Trump, whose administration had elevated Homan's role and championed his aggressive tactics, released a fiery statement. Tom Homan is a hero. This is a disgraceful attack on law enforcement by the deep state. We are watching America crumble under the weight of leftist tyranny. Conservative pundits echoed similar sentiments, warning of a dark new era where law enforcers were turned into lawbreakers, not because of their actions, but because of their politics. Pro-Homan protests were soon organized outside ICE facilities in Texas and Arizona, with banners reading, "Free Homan now," "Stop the political witch hunt," "Defend our borders, not criminals." But on the other side of the divide, a different kind of reaction was unfolding. Immigration advocates, human rights lawyers, and civil liberties organizations celebrated the arrest as a breakthrough, a moment they had waited for years. The ACLU tweeted, "Accountability has arrived. This arrest is not vengeance, it's justice." At vigils held across Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, families who had suffered under ICE policies gathered to honor those they claimed had been unlawfully detained or deported. One emotional speaker at a candlelight vigil in Queens said, "My brother was taken without a lawyer, held for months, and deported without cause. They called it law and order. I call it cruelty. Today, for the first time, someone is answering for it." The contrasting reactions revealed the deep fault lines running through America's immigration debate, and they were growing wider by the hour. Inside the legal storm, behind the media frenzy and public protests, a team of federal prosecutors was already preparing one of the most complex legal cases in recent history. Sources inside the Department of Justice suggested that more names from the encrypted whistleblower files were being verified. These included former senior ICE officials, regional directors, and legal counsel suspected of having knowledge, or even participation, in the obstruction efforts. Legal analysts speculated that prosecutors might offer Homan a deal if he agreed to name others involved or testify against higher-ups who approved the controversial tactics. But Homan so far remained defiant. His legal team issued a strong statement. Mr. Homan stands by his record and denies all allegations. He will fight this case in court, not in the press. If the case proceeds to trial, it could mean months of testimony, dozens of witnesses, thousands of pages of documents, and more uncomfortable truths about how U.S. immigration enforcement operated behind closed doors. Court watchers noted that Judge Boasberg had already hinted that additional hearings would be public, a move that suggests the court wants transparency and knows the nation is watching. Meanwhile, Capitol Hill was on fire. Lawmakers called emergency press briefings. Oversight committees began discussing expanding investigations. Rumors swirled that some current DHS officials had quietly lawyered up. One Democratic representative tweeted, "This is just the beginning. If Homan broke the law, who else in the chain of command knew?" Even moderate politicians, who had long avoided taking sides in the immigration debate, found themselves being forced to speak out. The Biden administration, when asked to comment, issued a carefully worded statement. "We respect the independence of the judiciary. No individual is above the law, regardless of position or political affiliation." But the damage had already been done. America wasn't just having a legal debate, it was having a moral reckoning. The future of federal immigration enforcement suddenly feels uncertain. Will ICE be restructured after this scandal? Will whistleblowers be empowered or silenced? Will public trust in immigration institutions ever be restored? Already, internal reviews have been launched inside DHS. Several high-ranking ICE officials have reportedly taken leaves of absence. Some advocates are calling for a full congressional inquiry, not just into Homan's actions, but into the entire system that allowed such defiance to allegedly take root. But the biggest question remains. Will Tom Homan go to prison, or will he become a political martyr? If convicted, he could face up to 20 years in prison for obstruction and contempt, depending on how many counts stick. But if acquitted, the fallout could be just as explosive, with millions seeing it as proof that accountability remains elusive in Washington. For now, Tom Homan sits in a federal holding facility, awaiting his next hearing. The country is divided, angry, and glued to its screens. The courthouse that shook America may soon become the stage for a trial that defines how far power can go before the law pushes back. One thing is clear: this is no longer just a courtroom drama. It's a defining chapter in America's story.